It was a typical Friday night, and Samantha was excited about her blind date with a guy named David, whom she had met through a dating app. She had spent the entire afternoon getting ready, picking out the perfect dress, and doing her hair and makeup. David had suggested a trendy new restaurant downtown, and Samantha was thrilled to try it out. She arrived a few minutes early and waited anxiously for him to arrive. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, David arrived. He was tall, handsome, and well-dressed, but there was something about him that made Samantha feel uneasy. It wasn't just his piercing blue eyes or the way he seemed to be staring at her as if he could see through her. As they sat down to dinner, Samantha tried to shake off her unease and engage in conversation. David seemed charming and well-spoken, but there was something about the way he spoke that made her skin crawl. As they ate, Samantha noticed that David hardly touched his food. He seemed more interested in staring at her and asking her personal questions. She tried to deflect some of the questions, but David persisted. Samantha started to feel trapped, and her mind began to race with thoughts of how to end the date early. Suddenly, David leaned across the table and whispered in her ear, "You're mine now." Samantha's heart raced, and she tried to push him away, but David was too strong. He grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the restaurant, dragging her along the street towards a dark alley. Samantha screamed for help, but no one seemed to hear her. David continued to pull her along until they reached an abandoned warehouse. He dragged her inside, and Samantha could feel her heart pounding in her chest. As they entered the dark, eerie warehouse, Samantha realized that David was not the person she thought he was. He had a sinister look in his eyes, and she knew that she was in grave danger. David pushed her into a chair and tied her up with rope. Samantha could feel her pulse racing as she struggled to free herself. She begged and pleaded with David to let her go, but he just laughed and said, "You're not going anywhere." Samantha's mind raced as she tried to come up with a plan to escape. Suddenly, she remembered her pepper spray in her purse. She tried to reach for it, but David caught her and took it away. David continued to taunt and torture Samantha, playing with her mind and body. He would leave her alone in the dark for hours on end, and then suddenly reappear to torment her some more. Days turned into weeks, and Samantha began to lose track of time. She was starving, thirsty, and desperate for a way out. She knew that she had to escape before David killed her. One night, Samantha heard a faint sound in the distance. It sounded like a police siren. She mustered all the strength she had left and screamed for help. The sound grew louder, and suddenly, the door burst open. It was the police, responding to a tip from a concerned neighbor who had heard her screams. David was arrested, and Samantha was rushed to the hospital. She had suffered from severe dehydration and malnutrition, and her mental state was fragile. In the weeks that followed, Samantha struggled to come to terms with what had happened to her. She was plagued by nightmares and flashbacks, and she knew that she would never be the same again. As she slowly started to rebuild her life, Samantha learned that David had been a serial killer who had lured dozens of women into his trap. She was lucky to have survived, but she knew that others had not been so fortunate. Samantha was haunted by the thought that she could have been one of David's victims, but she tried to focus on moving forward. She sought therapy to help her cope with the trauma she had experienced and slowly began to rebuild her life. She started speaking out about her experience, warning others about the dangers of online dating and the importance of being vigilant. Her story made national headlines, and she became a spokesperson for victims of online dating crimes. As she gained more confidence, Samantha started dating again, but this time, she took precautions. She made sure to meet potential dates in public places and let her friends know where she was going. Eventually, Samantha met someone special, someone who treated her with respect and kindness. They fell in love and started a life together, but Samantha never forgot about the horrors she had endured. She continued to use her voice to raise awareness about online dating safety and became an advocate for victims of crime. Her story inspired others to come forward and speak out, and she became a beacon of hope for those who had suffered in silence. In the end, Samantha had found a way to turn her tragedy into something positive, something that could help others. She knew that her experience would stay with her forever, but she was determined not to let it define her. She had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. As soon as Mark arrived at the restaurant, he knew something was off. His date, Sarah, was already there, but she was fidgeting nervously with her purse and barely looked up to acknowledge him. Mark sat down across from her and tried to make small talk, but Sarah seemed distant and distracted. He asked her if everything was okay, but she just nodded and told him she was fine. Throughout the dinner, Sarah barely touched her food, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. As they talked, Mark noticed a strange look in Sarah's eyes. It was almost as if she was afraid of him. Suddenly, Sarah's phone rang, and she excused herself to take the call. Mark sat at the table, feeling uneasy and unsure of what was going on. When Sarah returned, her demeanor had changed completely. She was now jittery and paranoid, looking over her shoulder every few seconds. "Is everything okay?" Mark asked, his voice low and concerned. But before Sarah could answer, two men in black suits stormed into the restaurant and approached their table. They grabbed Sarah and dragged her out of the restaurant, leaving Mark sitting there in shock. Mark quickly realized that this was no ordinary date gone wrong. Sarah had been mixed up in something dangerous, and now Mark was involved too. Mark frantically searched for any clues as to what had happened to Sarah, eventually discovering a hidden compartment in her purse containing a USB drive with classified government documents. Sarah had been working as a spy, and now Mark was in possession of sensitive information that could get them both killed. Mark and Sarah had to work together to figure out who had set them up and why, all while avoiding the dangerous people who were after them. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a web of lies and corruption that went all the way to the top of the government. In the end, Mark and Sarah managed to expose the truth and bring the corrupt officials to justice. But the experience had left them both scarred and wary of trusting anyone again. And as they parted ways, they both knew that their lives would never be the same. Mark watched Sarah walk away, feeling a deep sense of loss. He had only known her for a few hours, but they had been through so much together. He wondered if he would ever see her again. As he was lost in thought, his phone beeped. It was a text message from Sarah. "Meet me at the park. 10 minutes, it read. Mark hesitated for a moment, but then he decided to go. He needed to know what Sarah had to say. When he arrived at the park, he saw Sarah sitting on a bench, looking at the ground. She looked up when she heard him approach. "Mark, I'm sorry about what happened tonight," she said. "I never wanted to involve you in all of this." "It's okay," Mark replied. "I'm just glad you're safe." "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not just a spy. I'm a double agent." Mark's heart sank. He had no idea what to say. "I was working for the other side," Sarah continued. "But then I met you, and everything changed. I couldn't go through with the mission. I knew I had to warn you." Mark felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a chance for them after all. "I don't know what to do," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "I'm caught between two worlds, and I don't know if I can trust anyone." Mark took Sarah's hand, trying to reassure her. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together." They sat there for a few minutes, lost in thought, before Sarah spoke again. "I have one last job to do," she said. "But then I'll be free. And when it's all over, I want to start over. With you." Mark smiled, feeling a sense of relief. Maybe there was hope for them after all. As they walked away from the park, Mark knew that their journey was far from over. But he also knew that they had each other, and that was all that mattered. Lena was excited to meet her online date, Jack, for the first time. They had talked for weeks and had so much in common. When she arrived at the restaurant, Jack was already there, sitting at a table in the corner. But as Lena approached him, she felt a sense of unease. Jack looked different from his pictures on the dating app. His hair was longer, and his skin was paler, almost sickly. Despite her reservations, Lena sat down across from Jack and started to chat. But as they talked, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His eyes seemed to glaze over as he spoke, and his smile was unnaturally wide. Then, Jack's phone rang, and he excused himself to take the call. Lena sat there, feeling uneasy, and decided to Google Jack's name to see if she could find any information on him. As she scrolled through the search results, Lena's heart raced as she discovered that Jack was a wanted serial killer who had been on the run for months. Just as Lena was about to run out of the restaurant, Jack returned to the table, a sinister grin on his face. "You shouldn't have done that, Lena," he said, his voice cold and menacing. Lena tried to run, but Jack was too fast. He grabbed her by the arm and dragged her out of the restaurant, into his car. As they drove through the deserted streets, Lena realized that she was trapped. Jack had planned everything, from the fake photos on the dating app to the call that had distracted her. Southwest He could get close enough to grab her. When they arrived at Jack's hideout, Lena knew that she was in for a terrifying night. Jack locked her in a dark, windowless room and left her there, alone and scared. As the hours passed, Lena tried to find a way out, but the room was completely secure. She could hear Jack's footsteps outside, taunting her and playing mind games. But Lena refused to give up. She was determined to escape and find a way to stop Jack before he hurt anyone else. With all her strength, Lena kicked open the door and ran towards the front door. But Jack was waiting for her, armed with a knife. In a brutal struggle, Lena fought for her life, using everything she had learned from her self-defense classes. With a final blow, she managed to disarm Jack and escape. As Lena ran through the streets, gasping for air, she knew that she had narrowly escaped death. But the horror of that night would stay with her forever, a constant reminder of the dangers of online dating and the evil that could lurk behind a seemingly innocent face.